It's pretty amazing what you can do with a camera and a little bit of chutzpah. Welcome, Senator Rand Paul. Why weren't bureaucratic investigators able to uncover what this young man did with a camera?
You know, I think because we don't have any investigators. This question was asked over and over again. The Democrats were complaining, oh, it's sensational in the videos. And to my mind, it's like, where have the government inspectors been for decades? I think part of the problem is this. The federal government pays for these programs, but the states sign people up. So there's no incentive for the states to police these programs because to the states it's free. So right now, new people we add to Medicaid, and a lot of these programs are Medicaid, 90% of the bill is paid at the federal government, 10% is paid for by the states. So the states look at it as, oh, well, this is free, who cares? I don't care whether it's an able-bodied person, I don't care whether they have a job, I don't really care whatever their income is. That's the way the states treat these, particularly blue states. So Minnesota hasn't cared for a long time. But there is a legitimate question. Why has the federal government not sent inspectors into the states to look at this? It took Nick Shirley a period of days. We asked him, how did you find the ones that, well, I looked up the spending and I found the autism centers that had hundreds and hundreds of clients, and they were the biggest one in Minnesota. So I figured I'd just go see if the people with autism were showing up, and he got there and nobody was there. He went to adult learning centers or leering centers, I can't even spell the word, and nobody was there. But this young man had the wherewithal to do it, and you're right, the entire federal government didn't do their job.
You know what? And it's a wake-up call, should be for some in the dominant media and even elsewhere, that, you know, the story is outdoors, not indoors. And what they uncovered. Now, how do you fix that issue you were just talking about, though? The federal government is paying for this stuff. The state government administers it. Sounds like an easy fix, but it definitely isn't, right?
So we looked at this last year, and if you were to change Medicaid to 50-50, a lot of Medicaid is 50-50. It's split between the state and the federal government. Then they have skin in the game, and as they sign people up, they're like, well, it costs us money also. Most of it, a big chunk of the Medicaid expansions is 90% federal government, 10% states. If you change that, make it 50-50, they would then have skin in the game, and it saves the federal government about $800 billion over 10 years. So $80 billion a year is nothing, not insignificant, but it also would affect the supervision to prevent fraud, because if the states were paying 50%, they will care more if they're being ripped off. So there are bad people that rip off people all the time, but there's more of it if nobody's looking. And if the people signing people up have no incentive to look. So what I've been advocating is, let's change Medicaid to 50-50. Let's change food stamps to 50-50. Let's get rid of candy from food stamps. Let's get rid of full sugar soda from food stamps. Let's get rid of chips and dips and ding-dongs and Twinkies from food stamps. Why in the world should you be able to buy a bag of candy? You can literally buy a bag of candy on food stamps. So there's a lot of things we could do to make this better. And, you know, what Nick Shirley and James O'Keefe have shown us is that this fraud is rampant, and particularly in blue states that are resisting the federal government. You know, the Trump administration has tried to look at some of the election fraud, but they're being resisted. California won't show them the rolls. Minnesota won't show them the rolls. Even in my state, when we used to have Democrats elected, our Secretary of State refused a court order from the federal government to remove ineligible people from the rolls. She just refused to do it. This has been a strategy of Democrats for a long time. They don't care who votes, and they want lots of names on there because some of these harvesting companies are harvesting names of people who don't vote, and they're voting multiple names from a single address.
J.D. Vance, more on the young journalist who is really breaking amazing ground here. J.D. Vance, if the media was worth their salt, they would take notes from Nick and other citizen journalists who care about investigating stories that affect the American people instead of trying to silence them. Yeah, this really should be an awakening for a lot of people in media on both sides, everywhere, really. Let me ask you, though, you've been there for a good chunk of time. You're not a career politician. People have been stealing from the government since we had a government. It's my sense, though, that the tide is really turning, that this is a time where the government is poised to really get squared away, whether they like it or not. There seems to be, this seems real. This seems like a sea change. Is it?
Well, you're right. There have always been people willing to steal. But when government only confiscated 3% of GDP and spent 3% of GDP like they did in the 19th century, there was less to steal, and people had to work harder to put food on their table, so there were less people stealing from the government. Now government at all levels takes about a third of GDP. State government 10 to 15%, federal government 20 to 25%. But because so much is being taken, and because the people signing you up for welfare are not the same people paying for the welfare, it's a huge problem. So I'm all for policing it. I'm all for putting people in jail. I was proud of the Trump administration. They tracked one guy down all the way to Somalia, caught him and brought him back. Now the money's gone. But we pointed out in our hearing today that if you try to steal from a retailer or you try to steal from Visa, do you know how long it takes Visa to figure out somebody's stealing? If I lose my card somewhere and I haven't noticed it yet, Visa's usually calling me and saying, hey, did you just buy something for $1,200 from a jewelry store in D.C.? Because that's not on my list of things. I haven't been to a jewelry store ever in D.C. So they pick it up very quickly. The government, it would be 10 years and maybe nobody ever picks it up. When we did all the COVID stuff, I voted against all the welfare they gave everybody. They gave everybody a check under that. But people stole tens of millions of dollars. One guy stole $5 million, bought a small island, bought a Lamborghini, bought a fancy motorcycle, and they caught him only when he came back to get another loan. He liked the first loan so much he came back for another one. They finally caught him. But yeah, if the government is doing too much, if the government's spending too much, there's going to be more theft.
What an interesting analogy. You're right about those credit cards. Hey, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you real quick about Butler. Butler, Pennsylvania, the assassination attempt on President Trump 2 years ago this week. You were terrific in those hearings. Here's my sense. It's awkward for President Trump to talk about this because he is surrounded by the people who failed him that day. It's true. And, the other possibility, Mrs. Comparator said today she thinks it was an inside job. I know we don't have all the facts. You know we don't have all the facts. Are we just going to leave it at that?
Well, I saw an interview with President Trump the other day. It was interesting. Here's his response. He very readily admitted they made mistakes that day and somebody really screwed up that day. And he was literally millimeters away from dying that day. Literally, these bullets are so powerful. And he just happened at the last moment, and not everybody remembers this, the last moment he turns his head to point at a chart on immigration. And had he not turned his head, he would have died. I think it happened almost instantaneously because the bullet takes, less than a second to do the traveling. He began to announce it and turn right as the bullet was fired. It would have killed him. And so we're very fortunate that didn't happen. As far as investigating it, we found error after error after error. I took it at face value that people didn't do it on purpose, but that it was terrible, terrible security work. I started out not an expert in security, but I learned a lot from that investigation, and there's no way that roof should have been left open. And there was several times the president could have been removed by the stage. It also might have saved the people behind him who died. With even 40 seconds left, they were shouting, "Man on a roof." They relayed that to him, and they didn't take him off. But this suspicious person, the shooter, they saw him an hour or two beforehand. The president should have never gone on the stage. If the president wasn't on the stage, they wouldn't have fired into the crowd. They were trying to kill the president, and they killed the people behind him. But those people would have survived if the president wasn't on the stage. They never should have left the president. That was the first mistake they made, and they should have taken him off several minutes before the shots rang out. They knew there was enough suspicion. Guy with the big backpack, guy with a rangefinder, and, so much suspicion and people not doing their job. But I tend to think incompetence as opposed to an inside job. That's my opinion.
Very quickly, sir, you ran for president once before. It's going to be wide open, technically, and it's going to get. Are you thinking about running?
You know, I'm an old-fashioned conservative. I don't think the government should own businesses, and I don't think we should raise taxes. So tariffs are taxes. I'm not for raising the tariffs, and I'm not for raising taxes on Americans. There aren't many other candidates saying that. I want to be the free market conservative, the Milton Friedman kind of conservative in the Republican Party. Whether that means running for the president or just running for election, haven't decided yet. But I do want to be a voice of the old traditional conservative that says the government is best that governs least.
Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, thank you very much for joining us. Little known fact, he's never been to a jewelry store in Washington, D.C. I take it you've been to one in Kentucky because your wife, you know, earrings,
yes,
that kind of thing. They love
ju-
these things.
Yep. Jewelry is a woman's best friend.
Thank you, Senator Paul, and the best to the missus, and we'll be right back.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.